I'm getting so many of you very angry. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has insisted footage showing racist comments made by a campaigner was a set-up. Andrew Parker was seen making a series of offensive remarks about Rishi Sunak. He's now apologised but insisted he was goaded into making them. Here's what the Reform leader has to say about the event, though.
Someone told us he was an actor. We rang him this morning, the Daily Telegraph rang him this morning. He denied point blank that he was an actor. It turns out he is an actor. I found his website. He's a well-spoken actor who does something called rough speaking. Well, I was in the office when he arrived last Saturday, and he was doing rough speaking. It was an act right from the very start.
So you've met him?
I was working, and he came in and came up to me and said hello, and then he went out canvassing where the undercover filming took place. And he was rough speaking. He wasn't being himself from day one. I have to tell you, this whole thing is a complete and total setup.
Rishi Sunak condemned the racial slurs made against him and said it was part of a broader pattern of behaviour. This story has got you very, very angry. So angry that I can't even read some of your comments out because there's some rude words and it's Saturday lunchtime. But joining me now is broadcaster and journalist Mike Parry and the former editor of the Labour... Thank you, Mike. And former editor of the Labour list, Peter Edwards. You can do a thumbs up as well if you wanted.
I'll save my thumbs up till after polling day.
Right, OK. Oh, my Lord. Fighting talk straight away.
Certainly is.
Now, I mean, this story has got the viewers and the listeners really, really agitated.
Yeah.
They are convinced that there is something more to this story than meets the eye. Channel 4 have said their investigation was completely above board. They'd never met this man. But people are really, really angry about this one. So I'm going to come to you first on this one, Mike. What do you make of the whole story and what's happened so far?
Well, what happens is if you run a campaign for a general election, you need a very good organisational body behind you, because this isn't the first time that Nigel Farage has been tripped up or found himself in, a difficult position in this campaign. Only last week we had the situation regarding another TV issue when two Reform candidates, were accused of putting out possible racist posts. Had to be dispatched. Now, this guy we're talking about, Andrew Parker, he was just a worker, so there's not a question of, he's got to be banned. He's just been told you're not welcome.
Just a volunteer canvassing.
Exactly. And from what I've read, it's a very detailed story. From what I've read, he says that, no, he wanted to support reform. He went in, and the first time the TV people never approached him. The first time he found out that he was subject to this was... he was as surprised as anybody else, but he was never asked by anybody. This is the point he's making. He's saying, nobody ever asked me to go and join Reform in Clacton. I have not been put up to this. I was doing it genuinely. Now, Nigel's got a huge problem, Nigel Farage, about getting his message over. So if I just show you this is from a daily newspaper this morning, OK? Now, this is... Let us rebuild, reform. So his three policies are stand up to Starmer, freeze immigration, scrap tax on income. That message is not going anywhere, right? This is his agenda. It's not going anywhere because every day he's now finding himself having to explain why people associated to reform are coming out with stuff which is found to be very unpleasant, very questionable. And I have to say, Nigel's an intelligent man, he's a straight speaker, and he attracts people who are looking for some alternative sort of vote. Unfortunately, in my view, the people he attracts are not particularly savoury in some cases.
That's your opinion, a very strong opinion. Lots of very strong opinions on this one. Peter, what do you make of this? I mean, lots of people are convinced that Channel 4 are, involved in some way. Everyone is denying that is the case, quite rightly so. But what we're talking about, Mike's got a point, is all we're talking about, and not just with Reform, but with Labour and the Conservatives, is the issues around it. We're not actually talking about the policies, which are surely the things we should be concentrating on.
Well, I think racism is a big issue, and the racism that we've heard this week from Reform activists is unacceptable. But I want to particularly tackle this point about Channel 4. There is no evidence at all produced by any supporters of Reform or by Nigel Farage that Channel 4 behaved in anything other than a proper way. And it's serious to the point of, madness suggests that Channel 4, a broadcaster of around 40 years standing, would directly interfere in the result of a general election seat by doing a pretense or a fabrication on one of the most high-profile politicians in the country. It's beyond the realms of fantasy, and one can all have a view on Channel 4's output. I generally think it's pretty good. But the idea that they would lie and cheat and connive to trip up a candidate in this way is peculiar beyond belief, and Reform have offered no evidence that it was a fabrication or this gent was an actor.
You're absolutely right. He's an actor. He's a part-time actor, OK? I mean, lots of people are part-time actors because actors don't work a lot of the time. Do you see what I mean? So a lot of people are doing that. But I agree with you on the Channel 4 thing. A very established media outfit, OK? Jon Snow for years was the front man for Channel 4, so we all know where their politics lie.
A credible person.
A very credible person, but at least he gave us an indication of which way the politics of the station lay. But again, this guy says, nobody ever came to me and asked me to get involved in Reform. This guy wasn't a candidate. The most he'd done was go and deliver leaflets for the lot. So, as a journalist myself for 50 years, I can't believe that somebody would have actually set this up in order to try and discredit somebody who's running for Parliament, particularly the leader of a party. I just don't get it. George Galloway is running his own party and his own campaign, but George hasn't come across these sort of things, as George doesn't attract people who are desperate to find a particular sphere of politics they can go to. The problem with Nigel is he's misunderstood by many people. Most of his policies are quite straightforward, quite acceptable, but unfortunately there are elements of society who see him as a flag waver and a flag bearer for an extreme position which I don't believe Nigel possesses.
I think on the subject of George Galloway, I think, to play devil's advocate here, I think there are some people that align themselves to him and what he comes out with who have said offensive things.
But they haven't hit the headlines like Nigel Farage has.
Is that the point, Peter? They haven't hit the headlines like Nigel Farage, who was on Question Time last night as well, with some would say a hostile audience. Nigel, this is a volunteer. Nigel doesn't vet all the volunteers who work for him. No party does. So is there maybe more people out to get, to use that phrase, Nigel Farage and the Reform Party than the other parties, including even George Galloway?
No, and use that phrase, out to get Nigel. There is no evidence for that at all, because that would imply something that is a conspiracy to undermine Reform, whereas the only reason I want to undermine or attack Reform is through the ballot box and the media and the debate. And the Times newspaper, which is not a hotbed of radical socialism, the Times newspaper points out today that Reform keeps attracting some of these people on their campaign trail and says don't vote Reform because of concerns about Farage, because of divisive language, and because some of the activists behave in an improper and racist manner.
But we have had divisive language used by members of the Labour Party, members of the Conservative Party, people aligned with George Galloway. It's not just a Reform issue, is it?
It's much, much, much worse with Reform. And I've lived in East London for many years, and George Galloway was an incredibly divisive figure. And again, one can be for or against his views on the Middle East, but he is someone who brings division and rancour rather than unity or even solutions.
Nigel, I think, is sometimes too brave for his own good. I mean, he literally speaks his mind, and that's what people like about him. And people want to be associated with him. They see him as a leader. But frankly, there are other issues here. The Putin issue, I don't think has done Nigel Farage any good. So many people will disagree with the explanations he gave for the NATO-Ukraine situation, OK? And so it's all building up so negatively for him. And also, when he was asked to speak out about, the latest scandal involving this guy, what's his name, Andrew Parker, and these horrendous comments about the Prime Minister and the insults land against him, I'm not sure that Nigel came out strongly enough to condemn what had been said.
In Nigel's defence, because he's not here to defend himself, he did act swiftly and condemn the comments and describe them as vile, which they indeed are. So unlike some other parties, he did act
OK, I accept
decisively.
that. I accept that.
Right, OK, thank you very much. It's a very, very opinion-dividing debate. Lots of very, very strong opinions on this. So let us know what you're thinking. It's important that we cover all bases here. You've heard what Peter and you've heard what Mike have to say. So get in touch and let us know what you think as well. Now, responding to Mr. Farage's claims, a spokesperson for Channel 4 said, "We strongly stand by our rigorous and duly impartial journalism, which speaks for itself. We met Mr. Parker for the first time at Reform UK's headquarters, where he was a Reform Party canvasser. We did not pay the Reform UK canvasser or anyone else in this report. Mr. Parker was not known to Channel 4 News and was filmed covertly via the undercover operation."